work that you've done, as you mentioned, was at once upon a time, perhaps for the millennial generation, and maybe you're still helping the millennial generation. But as we graduate, or you think about the next generation, which is the Gen Z, tell us, for our viewers first, like when you say the quarter life crisis, how has it come about, and especially in the context of Gen Z, and do you sense that, you know, this crisis that you describe, what it is, let's first understand, and then how much of it is relevant or applicable to the Gen Z generation?
Yeah. So just to start up, like, people make fun of, right? We used to make fun of midlife crises, people having these midlife crises. And, you know, the term quarter life crisis has been around for a while. I mean, I remember in my 20s hearing about it. So I'm not that old, but it's been around for a while. And, you know, I remember watching an Oprah and she talked about it many, many years ago. So basically a quarter life crisis, and it doesn't have to happen exactly at 25. That is, you know, one of the myths. But it's really an identity crisis. It's when how you saw yourself, what you thought you were as a person doesn't match your reality, doesn't match, you know, the person that you're becoming. It's an existential crisis. And I know that when we hear the word crisis, we tend to think like, oh my gosh, it's a crisis. And it's like, well, again, you know, a lot of times people feel like their whole lives have to be falling apart to sort of be going through a quarter life crisis or a midlife crisis. Like, it's not necessarily that your whole life is falling apart. It's really when you get to this very existential place of, I thought I wanted all of these things, and now I don't want these things. I thought I was this kind of person, but I don't really feel like this kind of person, and I don't know who to become. I don't know what's next for me. And that's, you know, can be very, very scary to wake up every day and feel like I'm so disconnected from what I really wanted and what's really important to me. And so the quarter life crisis really comes about. What's unique about that versus a midlife crisis is the quarter life crisis is, you know, we have to make a lot of choices and decisions about our lives very young. I think way too young. Which is, you know, at 17, 18, 19, you have to pick a college major. You have to decide if you're going to go to college. Then you have to decide, you know, what your major is. And then, you know, there's this expectation of whatever your major is when you graduate, I need to get a job in this field. And then I need to build and build and build. And that's what I need to do. And what happens is that when we're dreaming in our bedrooms at night in high school, right, about our future and what it looks like, we forget that, you know, it's a dream. It's what's in our mind. So when we dream it and we think it like, oh, I'm going to become this, you know, I'm going to work in finance, and I'm going to make a bunch of money, and I'm going to love it, and it's going to be great, and my life's going to be fabulous. And it's really easy to say, I want to do finance, and then get a job in finance and be like, I hate this. This is awful. Like, yeah, the money might be good and I might be able to afford certain things, but I never pictured myself getting up every day and going to this job that I absolutely hate. That's like soul sucking. But what happens is that then for some people, they're able to sort of realize that early and pivot, you know, and move to something else, or they kind of keep doubling down, right? Like, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. And then the crisis happens when you're like, oh, I've put all this time and energy into this one thing. I can't leave now, but I don't quite know where my identity is. That's one version that happens for people. And another one is that for some people who really never knew what they wanted to do, and they just kind of picked a random major, and then they just kind of got a job, and they're going from like job to job to job to job, and they're feeling like, what's my place in the world? What's happening? So I see a lot more of these crises at 26, 27, 28. Than exactly 25. And what I think is so interesting about the Gen Z generation is what we're seeing is, right, we have the real, you know, there are millennials now that are over 40, right? And there are other millennials, right? The if you go right by the dates that we've assigned everybody, there are also millennials that are about, you know, or what we call Zennials, right? Which is this combination of people that are in like 25 and above now. But so we have this Gen Z generation that is entering into the workforce, and they've entered into the workforce during a global pandemic. They, a lot of them, either their high school was, they didn't have sort of the traditional high school. They weren't, all of these milestones that we talk about and we look forward to for many of these people that are entering into the workforce now have been, didn't have a college graduation. They've entered work with like remotely, this is their only introduction to work. And so what I think is so important is, I'm a big proponent of awareness. Like everyone has said, well, why do we need to know these things? Like why is this important? And it's important because for this generation that's entering the workforce, for the generation and also for the people that hire the generation, to be aware that this is, this identity crisis does happen, and that the role of your 20 something years is you're doing a lot. You're trying to figure out who you are and what you want, and you're simultaneously trying to figure out like, what's your career? Where do I want to live? What's my love life look like? What does all that mean? And they each inform each other. So you're constantly like, tweaking the recipe. And a lot of times employers see, Gen Zers coming into the workforce, and they're seeing them now. And it's really important for them to understand developmentally, not only what they're going through at this age, but developmentally what they're going through because of everything that's happened in the world.
Yeah.